Yeah.
Has there been low points along the way?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are days when I don't really feel like doing anything. Not so much anymore. Like, not for the last couple years. I don't really feel that way. I've um, more so just wanted to try to do anything possible to make my life better at this point. But at the beginning, there were some ups and downs. There were some really hard things to adjust to. Um, First off, just like the first couple months, the amount of pain I was in was really, really hard. I mean, I remember screaming at the top of my lungs in the hospital because I thought my legs were on fire. And obviously, I can't feel anything, but it's all nerve pain. And so that was a really hard night. I asked them to give me as much pain meds as possible. They're like, you've had as much as you can have. So just kind of deal with it. Go to a happy place, sort of thing. So that was a pretty low point. And then every now and again, it's hard, like realizing things that I wanted to do in my life that I won't be able to do anymore.
Are you scared? Excited?
No, it was cool. Um, like I was, I was never afraid of it. I had to think through a lot. Should I should I do this? Like be the first person. I could wait until number 2 or 3 and get a better version of the Neuralink. Like the first one might not work. Maybe it's actually gonna kind of suck. It's gonna be the worst version ever in a person. So why would I do the first one? Like I've already kind of been selected. I could just tell them, like okay, find someone else, and then I'll do number 2 or 3. Like I'm sure they would let me. They're looking for a few people anyways. But ultimately, I was like, I don't know. There's something about being the first one to do something. It's pretty cool. I always thought that if I had the chance, that I would like to do something for the first time. This seemed like a pretty good opportunity. And I was never scared. I think my like faith had a huge part in that. I always felt like God was preparing me for something. I almost wish it wasn't this because I had many conversations with God about not wanting to do any of this as a quadriplegic. I told him, I'll go out and talk to people. I'll go out and travel the world and talk to, stadiums, thousands of people, give my testimony. I'll do all of it, but like heal me first. Don't make me do all of this in a chair. That sucks. Um, and I guess he won that argument. I didn't really have much of a choice. I always felt like there was something going on. And to see how, I guess, easily I made it through the interview process and how quickly everything happened, how the stars sort of aligned with all of this, it it just told me, like as the surgery was getting closer, it just told me that it was all meant to happen. It was all meant to be. And so I shouldn't be afraid of anything that's to come. And so I wasn't. I kept telling myself, like, you say that now, but as soon as the surgery comes, you're probably going to be freaking out. Like, you're about to have brain surgery. And brain surgery is a big deal for a lot of people, but it's a even bigger deal for me. Like, it's all I have left. The amount of times I've been like, thank you, God, that you didn't take my brain and my personality and my ability to think, my like love of learning, like my character, everything. Like, thank you so much. Like, as long as you left me that, then I think I can get by. And I was about to let people go, like root around in there, like, hey, we're gonna go like put some stuff in your brain, like hopefully it works out. Um, and so it was something that gave me pause. But like I said, how smoothly everything went. I never expected for a second that anything would go wrong. Plus, the more people I met on the Barrows side and on the Neuralink side, they're just the most impressive people in the world. Yeah, that's one thing that I really, really enjoy about WebGrid
Yeah.
is because I'm so competitive. Um, like the higher the BPS, the higher the score, I know the better I'm doing. And so if I think I've asked at one point one of the guys, like if he could give me some sort of numerical feedback for calibration, like I would like to know what they're looking at. Like, oh, it is, we see like this number while you're doing calibration. And that means, at least on our end, that we think calibration is going well. Um, And I would love that because I would like to know if what I'm doing is going well or not. But then they've also told me, like, yeah, not necessarily like 1 to 1. It doesn't actually mean that calibration is going well in some ways. So it's not like 100%, and they don't want to like skew what I'm experiencing or want me to change things based on that if that number isn't always accurate to like how the model will turn out or how like the end result. That's at least what I got from it. One thing I have asked them, and something that I really enjoy striving for is towards the end of calibration, there is like a time between targets. And so I like to keep like at the end, that number as low as possible. So at the beginning, it can be, 4, 5, 6 seconds between me popping bubbles. But towards the end, I like to keep it below like 1.5, or if I could get it to like 1 second between like bubbles, because in my mind, that translates really nicely to something like WebGrid, where I know if I can hit a target one every second, that I'm doing real, real well.
There you go. That's the way to get a score on the calibrations, like the speed. How
Yeah.
quickly can you get from bubble to bubble?
Yeah.
So there's the open.
It also changes like how the models are trained. Like if I train a model, like in WebGrid, like I bootstrap on a model, which basically is them training models as I'm playing WebGrid, based off of like the WebGrid data that I'm. So like if I play WebGrid for 10 minutes, they can train off that data specifically in order to get me a better model. If I do that with point 0.3 versus point 0.1, the models come out different. The way that they interact it's just much, much different. So I have to be really careful. I found that doing it with point 0.3 is actually better in some ways, unless I can do it with point 0.1 and change all of the different parameters. Then that's more ideal, because obviously point 0.3 is faster than point 0.1. So I could get there. I can get there.
Can you click using your brain?
It sucked. It was really, really hard. The day they told me was the day of my big Neuralink tour at their Fremont facility. They told me like right before we went over there. It was really hard to hear. My initial reaction was, all right, go in, fix it. Like go in, take it out and fix it. The first surgery was so easy. Like I went to sleep. A couple hours later, I woke up and here we are. I didn't feel any pain, didn't take like any um, pain pills or anything. So I just knew that if they wanted to, they could go in and put in a new one like next day if that's what it took. Because I wanted it to be better, and I wanted not to lose the capability. I had so much fun playing with it for a few weeks, for a month. I had like it had opened up so many doors for me. It had opened up so many more possibilities that I didn't want to lose it after a month. I thought it would have been a cruel twist of fate if I had gotten to see the view from like the top of this mountain and then have it all come crashing down after a month.
When you're up at 2 a.m. playing WebGrid by yourself,
Yeah.
I just imagine like it's darkness and there's just a light glowing
Yeah.
and you're just focused. What's going through your mind? Or you're like in a state of flow where it's like the mind is empty, like those like Zen masters.
Yeah. Generally, it is me playing music of some sort. I have a massive playlist. And so I'm just like rocking out to music. And then it's also just like a race against time, because I'm constantly looking at how much battery percentage I have left on my implant. Like,
Yeah.
all right, I have 30%, which equates to, X amount of time, which means I have to break this record in the next, hour and a half, or else it's not happening tonight.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's a little stressful when that happens. When it's above 50%, I'm like, okay, like I got time. And it starts
Yeah.
getting down to 30 and then 20. It's like, all right, 10%, a little pop-up's gonna pop up right here, and it's gonna really screw my WebGrid flow.
Yeah.
It's gonna tell me that, like there's a like the low battery pop-up comes up, and I'm like, it's really gonna screw me over. So if I'm gonna break this record, I have to do it in the next like 30 seconds, or else that pop-up's gonna get in the way, like cover my WebGrid. And then after that, I go click on it, go back into WebGrid, and I'm like, all right, that means I have, 10 minutes left before this thing's dead. That's what's going on in my head generally, that and whatever song's playing. And I just want to break those records so bad. Like it's all I want when I'm playing WebGrid. has become less of like, oh, this is just a leisurely activity. Like, I just enjoy doing this because it just feels so nice and it puts me at ease. It is no. Once I'm in WebGrid, you better break this record or you're going to waste like 5 hours of your life right now. And I don't know. It's just fun. It's fun, man.
Have you ever tried WebGrid with like 2 targets and 3 targets? Can you get higher BPS with that?
Can you do that?
You mean like different color targets, or you mean
get multiple targets?
I mean, in years, it's going to be gigantic because we'll increase the number of electrodes dramatically. I think there is some argument for humans as a source of will. Will, yeah, source of will or purpose. So if you consider the human mind as being essentially there's the primitive limbic elements, which basically even like reptiles have, and there's the cortex, the thinking and planning part of the brain. Now, the cortex is much smarter than the limbic system, and yet is largely in service to the limbic system. It's trying to make the limbic system happy. I mean, the sheer amount of compute that's gone into people trying to get laid is insane. Without actually seeking procreation. They're just literally trying to do this sort of simple motion. And they get a kick out of it.
Yeah.
So this simple, which in the abstract, rather absurd motion, which is sex, the cortex is putting a massive amount of compute into trying to figure out how to do that.
So like 90% of distributed compute of the human species is spent on trying to get laid, probably. Like
a massive
large
amount.
percentage.
Yeah. There's no purpose to most sex except hedonistic. It's just sort of a joy or whatever, dopamine release. Now, once in a while, it's procreation, but for humans, modern humans, it's mostly recreational. So your cortex, much smarter than your limbic system, is trying to make the limbic system happy because the limbic system wants to have sex. So, or wants some tasty food or whatever the case may be. And then that is then further augmented by the tertiary system, which is your phone, your laptop, iPad, whatever, all your computing stuff. That's your tertiary layer. So you're actually already a cyborg. You have this tertiary compute layer, which is in the form of your computer with all the applications, all your compute devices.
What I saw in Memphis, the supercomputer cluster, is just this intense drive towards simplifying the process, understanding the process, constantly improving it, constantly iterating it.
Well, it's easy to say simplify it, and it's very difficult to do it. I have this very basic first principles algorithm that I run kind of as like a mantra, which is to first question the requirements, make the requirements less dumb. The requirements are always dumb to some degree. So if you want to start off by reducing the number of requirements, and no matter how smart the person is who gave you those requirements, they're still dumb to some degree. If you have to start there, because otherwise you could get the perfect answer to the wrong question. So try to make the question the least wrong possible. That's what question the requirements means. And then the second thing is try to delete whatever the step is, the part or the process step. Sounds very obvious, but people often forget to try deleting it entirely. And if you're not forced to put back at least 10% of what you delete, you're not deleting enough. And it's somewhat illogically, people often, most of the time, feel as though they've succeeded if they've not been forced to put things back in. But actually they haven't, because they've been overly conservative and have left things in there that shouldn't be. So, and only the third thing is try to optimize it or simplify it. Again, these all sound, I think, very, very obvious when I say them, but the number of times I've made these mistakes is more than I care to remember. That's why I have this mantra. So, in fact, I'd say the most common mistake of smart engineers is to optimize a thing that should not exist.
Right. So you, like you say, you run through the algorithm.
Yeah.
And basically show up to a problem, show up to the supercomputer cluster and see the process and ask, can this be deleted?
Yeah, first try to delete it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not easy to do.
No, and actually, there's what generally makes people uneasy is that you've got to delete at least some of the things that you delete, you will put back in.
Yeah.
But going back to sort of where our limbic system can steer us wrong is that we tend to remember with sometimes a jarring level of pain where we deleted something that we subsequently needed.
Yeah.
And so people will remember that one time they forgot to put in this thing 3 years ago, and that caused them trouble. And so they overcorrect, and then they put too much stuff in there and overcomplicate things. So you actually have to say, no, we're deliberately going to delete more than we should. So that we're putting at least 1 in 10 things we're going to add back in. But if you've got that kind of thing programmed in, it could, the AI could conclude something absolutely insane, like it's better in order to avoid any possible misgendering, all humans must die because then that misgendering is not possible because there are no humans. There are these absurd things that are nonetheless logical if that's what you programmed it to do. In 2001 Space Odyssey, what Arthur C. Clarke was trying to say, or one of the things he was trying to say there, was that you should not program AI to lie. Well, the single biggest thing that is often actually not mentioned in history books, but Durant does mention it, is the birthright. So, perhaps to some a counterintuitive thing happens when civilizations become are winning for too long. The birth rate declines. It can often decline quite rapidly. We're seeing that throughout the world today. Currently, South Korea is I think maybe the lowest fertility rate, but there are many others that are close to it. It's 0.8, I think. If the birth rate doesn't decline further, South Korea will lose roughly 60% of its population. But every year that birth rate is dropping. And this is true through most of the world. I don't mean to single out South Korea. It's been happening throughout the world. So as soon as any given civilization reaches a level of prosperity, the birth rate drops. And now you can go and look at the same thing happening in ancient Rome. So Julius Caesar took note of this, I think around 50-ish BC, and tried to pass, I don't know if he was successful, tried to pass a law to give an incentive for any Roman citizen that would have a third child. And I think Augustus was able to, well, he was, the dictator, so the Senate was just for show. I think he did pass a tax incentive for Roman citizens to have a third child, but those efforts were unsuccessful. Rome fell because the Romans stopped making Romans. That's actually the fundamental issue. And there were other things. There was they had quite a series of malaria epidemics and plagues and whatnot. But they had those before. It's just that the birth rate was far lower than the death rate.
It really is that simple.
Well, I'm saying that's
more people.
That's
required
at a fundamental level. If a civilization does not at least maintain its numbers, it will just. How many useful things can I get done?
Day-to-day basis. You wake up in the morning. How can I be useful today?
Yeah, maximize utility area under the curve of usefulness. Very difficult to be useful at scale.
At scale, can you speak to what it takes to be useful for somebody like you? Well, there's so many amazing, great teams. How do you allocate your time to be the most useful?
Well, time is the true currency.
Yeah.
So it is tough to say what is the best allocation of time. I mean, there are, often say, if you look at say Tesla. I mean, Tesla this year will do over $100 billion in revenue, so that's $2 billion a week. If I make slightly better decisions, I can affect the outcome by $1 billion. So then I try to do the best decisions I can, and on balance, at least compared to the competition, pretty good decisions. But the marginal value of a better decision can easily be, in the course of an hour, $100 million.
Given that, how do you take risks? How do you do the algorithm that you mentioned? I mean, deleting, given that a small thing can be $1 billion. How do you decide to?
Yeah.
And what's interesting, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of physics involved. And the two dominant physics for this electrical recording domain is diffusion physics and electromagnetism. And where one dominates, where Maxwell's equation dominates versus Fick's law dominates, depends on where your electrode is. If it's close to the source, mostly electromagnetic based. When you're farther away from it, it's more diffusion based. So essentially, when you're able to park it next to it, you can listen in on those individual chatter and those local changes in the potential. And the type of signal that you get are these canonical textbook neural spiking waveform. The moment you're further away, and based on some of the studies that people have done, Christoph Koch's lab and others, once you're away from that source by roughly around 100 micron, which is about width of a human hair, you no longer hear from that neuron. So we, our implant is actually two-part. The link has, these flexible tiny wires called threads that have multiple electrodes along its length. And they're only inserted into the cortical layer, which is about 3 to 5 millimeters in a human brain. In the motor cortex region, that's where the kind of the intention for movement lies in. And we have 64 of these threads, each thread having 16 electrodes along, the span of 3 to 4 millimeters, separated by 200 microns. So you can actually record along the depth of the insertion. And based on that signal, there's custom, integrated circuit or ASIC that we built that amplifies the neural signals that you're recording and then digitizing it, and then has some mechanism for detecting whether there was an interesting event that is a spiking event, and decide to send that or not send that through Bluetooth to an external device, whether it's a phone or a computer that's running this Neuralink application.
So there's onboard signal processing already just to decide whether this is an interesting event or not. So there is some computational power on board in addition to the human brain.
Yeah, so it does the signal processing to kind of really compress the amount of signal that you're recording. So we have a total of 1,000 electrodes sampling at just under 20 kilohertz with 10-bit each.
Was the recovery like, and when was the first time he was able to use it?
So he was actually immediately after the surgery, like an hour after the surgery, as he was waking up, we did turn on the device, make sure that we are recording neural signals. And we actually did have a couple signals that we noticed that he can actually modulate. And what I mean by modulate is that he can think about clenching his fist, and you could see the spike disappear and appear.
That's awesome.
And that was immediate,
Yeah.
right? Immediate after in the recovery room.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
a human being. I mean, what did that feel like for you? This device and a human being, a first step of a gigantic journey. I mean, it's a historic moment. Even just that spike, just to be able to modulate that.
Obviously there have been other, as you mentioned, pioneers that have participated in these groundbreaking BCI, investigational early feasibility studies. So we're obviously standing on the shoulders of the giants here. We're not the first ones to actually put electrodes in a human brain. But I mean, just leading up to the surgery, there was I definitely could not sleep. It's the first time that you're working in a completely new environment. We had a lot of confidence based on our benchtop testing, or preclinical R&D studies that the mechanism, the threads, the insertion, all that stuff is very safe, and that it's obviously ready for doing this in a human, but there's still a lot of unknown about, can the needle actually insert? We brought something like 40 needles just in case they break, and we ended up using only one. But I mean, that was a level of just complete unknown, right? Because it's a very, very different environment, and that's why we do clinical trial in the first place, to be able to test these things out. So extreme nervousness and many sleepless night leading up to the surgery, and definitely the day before the surgery. And it was an early morning surgery. Like we started at 7 a.m. And by the time it was around 10:30, it was everything was done. But I mean, first time seeing that, well, number one, just huge relief that this thing is doing what it's supposed to do. And two, I mean, just immense amount of gratitude for Nolan and his family, and then many others that have applied and that we've spoken to and will speak to are, true pioneers in every war. And I sort of call them the neural astronauts or neural not.
Yeah.
These amazing, just like in the 60s, right? Like these amazing just pioneers, right? Exploring the unknown outwards. In this case, it's inward. But an incredible amount of gratitude for them to, just participate and play a part. And it's a journey that we're embarking on together. But also, like, I think it was just that was a very, very important milestone, but our work was just starting. So a lot of just kind of anticipation for, okay, what needs to happen next? What are a set of sequences of events that needs to happen for us to, make it worthwhile for, both Nolan as well as us.
Just to linger on that, just a huge congratulations to you and the
Thank
team
you.
for that milestone. I know there's a lot of work left, but that's really exciting to see. There's that's a source of hope.
Well, yes, it is, but the bar is so much higher for it to become a useful thing for the user. And there's ways to solve this. I mean, you can sort of take the cop-out approach of, well, let's just let's take 5 seconds to click. Let's take a huge window of time so we can be very confident about the answer. Yeah. But again, world's best mouse. The world's best mouse doesn't take a second to click or 500 milliseconds to click. It takes 5 milliseconds to click or less. And so if you're aiming for that kind of high bar, then you really want to solve the underlying problem.
So maybe this is a good place to ask about how to measure performance.
Yeah.
How quickly does it go from, how quickly does it get there?
So this happened on a Tuesday. I remember this day very clearly because at some point during the day, it looked like he wasn't doing super well. Like, it looked like the model wasn't performing super well, and he was like getting distracted. But it wasn't the case. Like, what actually happened was he was trying something new, where he was just controlling the cursor. So he wasn't imagining moving his hand anymore. He was just imagining, I don't know what it is, some like abstract intention to move the cursor on the screen. And I cannot tell you what the difference between those two things are. I really, truly cannot. He's tried to explain it to me before. I cannot, give a first-person account of what that's like. But the expletives that he uttered in that moment were, enough to suggest that it was a very qualitatively different experience for him to just have direct neural control over a cursor. So it's actually like a diet plan associated with this. Like, it's a whole thing. So
great.
The first thing
I have to fast for 5 days. I have to go up to the mountains.
Actually, the fasting thing is important. So this is
focuses the mind. Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
So what I do is I don't eat for a little bit beforehand. And then I'll actually eat like a ton of peanut butter right before I play. And I get like
this is a real thing.
This is a real thing, yeah. And then it has to be really late at night. This is, again, a night owl thing I think we share, but it has to be like, midnight, 2 a.m. kind of time window. And I have a very specific like physical position I'll sit in, which is, I was homeschooled growing up. And so I did most of my work like on the floor, just like in my bedroom or whatever. And so I have a very specific situation
on the floor
that I sit and play. And then you have to make sure like there's not a lot of weight on your elbow when you're playing so that you can move quickly. And then I turn the gain of the cursor, so the speed of the cursor way up. So it's like small motions that actually move the cursor.
Are you moving with your wrist, or you're never?
I move with my fingers. So my wrist is almost completely still. I'm just moving my fingers.
Yeah. I'm not worried about it, but I can at least say that I'm comfortable with the certainty of it. If not having found out how to take the tragedy out of it when I think about, my kids either not having me or me not having them, or my wife.
Maybe I've come to accept the intellectual certainty of it, but it may be the pain that comes with losing the people you love. I don't think I've come to understand the existential aspect of it, like that this is going to end. And I don't mean like in some trite way. I mean like it certainly feels like it's not going to end. Like you live life like it's not going to end.
Right.
And the fact that this light that's shining, this consciousness is going to no longer be in one moment, maybe today. It's like it fills me when I really am able to load all that in with Ernest Becker's terror. Like it's a real fear. I think people aren't always honest with how terrifying it is.
Yeah.
I think the more you are able to really think through it, the more terrifying it is. It's not such a simple thing. Oh, well, it's the way life is. And if you really can load that in, it's hard. But I think that's why the Stoics did it, because it like helps you get your shit together and be like this. Well, like the moment, every single moment you're alive is just beautiful.
First, just a thank you to all the people I've gotten a chance to speak with for sharing their stories with me. I don't think there's any world really in which I can share their stories in as powerful a way as they can. But just I think to summarize at a very high level, what I hear over and over again is that people with ALS or severe spinal cord injury in a place where they basically can't move physically anymore, really at the end of the day are looking for independence. And that can mean different things for different people. For some folks, it can mean the ability just to be able to communicate again independently without needing to wear something on their face, without needing a caretaker to be able to put something in their mouth. For some folks, it can mean independence to be able to work again, to be able to navigate a computer digitally efficiently enough to be able to get a job, to be able to support themselves, to be able to move out and ultimately be able to support themselves after their family maybe isn't there anymore to take care of them. And for some folks, it's as simple as just being able to respond to their kid in time before they, run away or get interested in something else. And these are deeply personal and sort of very human problems. And what strikes me again and again when talking with these folks is that this is actually an engineering problem. This is a problem that with the right resources, with the right team, we can make a lot of progress on. And at the end of the day, I think that's a deeply inspiring message and something that makes me excited to get up every day.
So it's both an engineering problem in terms of a BCI, for example, that can give them capabilities where they can interact with the world. But also on the other side, it's an engineering problem for the rest of the world to make it more accessible for people living with quadriplegia.
Yeah. And I think I'll take a broad view sort of lens on this for a second. I think I'm very in favor of anyone working in this problem space. So beyond BCI, I'm happy and excited and willing to support in any way I can folks working on eye tracking systems, working on speech to text systems, working on head trackers or mouse sticks or quad sticks. And I've met many engineers and folks in the community that do exactly those things. And I think for the people we're trying to help, it doesn't matter what the complexity of the solution is as long as the problem is solved. And I want to emphasize that there can be many solutions out there that can help with these problems. And BCI is one of a collection of such solutions. So BCI in particular, I think, offers several advantages here. And I think the folks that recognize this immediately are usually the people who have spinal cord injury or some form of paralysis. Usually you don't have to explain to them why this might be something that could be helpful. It's usually pretty self-evident. So this is a problem we've worked on both with NHP, non-human primates, before our clinical trial, and then also with Nolan during the clinical trial. Maybe the first thing that's worth stating is what the goal is here. So the goal is really to enable the user to have a plug-and-play experience where, I guess they don't have to plug anything in, but a play experience where they can use the device whenever they want to, however they want to. Mm-hmm. And that's really what we're aiming for. And so there can be a set of solutions that get to that state without considering this non-stationarity problem. So maybe the first solution here that's important is that they can recalibrate whenever they want. This is something that that Nolan has the ability to do today. So he can recalibrate the system, at 2 a.m. in the middle of the night without his, caretaker or parents or friends around to help push a button for him. The other important part of the solution is that when you have a good model calibrated, that you can continue using that without needing to recalibrate it. So how often he has to do this recalibration today depends really on his appetite for performance. There are, we observe a sort of a degradation through time of how well any individual model works, but this can be mitigated behaviorally by the user adapting their control strategy. It can also be mitigated through a combination of sort of software features that we provide to the user. For example, we let the user adjust exactly how fast the cursor is moving. We call that the gain, for example, the gain of how fast the cursor reacts to any given input intention. They can also adjust the smoothing, how smooth the output of that cursor intention actually is. They can also adjust the friction, which is how easy is it to stop and hold still. And all these software tools allow the user a great deal of flexibility and troubleshooting mechanisms to be able to solve this problem for
By
themselves.
the way, all of this is done by looking to the right side of the screen, selecting the mixer, and in the mixer you have
It's like DJ mode. DJ mode for your VCI.
So, I mean, it's a really well done interface. It's really, really well done. And so, yeah, there's that bias that there's a cursor drift that Nolan talked about in a stream. Although he said that you guys were just playing around with it with him and they're constantly improving. So that could have been just a snapshot of that particular moment, a particular day. But he said that there was this cursor drift and this bias that could be removed by him, I guess, looking to the right side of the screen, the left side of the screen to kind of adjust the bias.
Yeah.
That's one interface action, I guess, to adjust the bias.
Yeah. So this is actually an idea that comes out of academia. There is some prior work with sort of BrainGate clinical trial participants where they pioneered this idea of bias correction. The way we've done it, I think, is it's very productized, very beautiful user experience where the user can essentially flash the cursor over to the side of the screen and it opens up a window where they can actually sort of adjust or tune exactly the bias of the cursor. So bias, maybe for people who aren't familiar, is just sort of what is the default motion of the cursor if you're imagining nothing. And it turns out that that's one of the first sort of qualia of the cursor control experience that's impacted by neural non-stationarity.
Qualia of the cursor experience.
I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. Like, I'm not the guy moving.
Very
thing.
poetic. I love it. The quality of the cursor. That's such a beautiful image, by the way. Just so the brown of the neurons. For some reason, I can't look away. It's really cool.
And the way that these things, like, I mean, your tissues generally don't have these beautiful colors. This is multiplex stain that uses these different proteins that are staining these at different colors. We use very standard set of staining techniques with HG, EBA1, and NUN, and GFAP. So if you go to the next image, this is also kind of illustrates the second point because you can make an argument. And initially, when we saw the previous image, we said, "Oh, like, are the threads just floating? Like, what is happening here? Like, are we actually looking at the right thing?" So what we did is we did another stain, and this is all done in-house, of this Masson's trichrome stain, which is in blue, that shows these collagen layers. So the blue basically, like, you don't want the blue around the implant threads because that means that there's some sort of scarring that's happened. And what you're seeing, if you look at individual threads, is that you don't see any of the blue, which means that there has been absolutely or very, very minimal to a point where it's not detectable amount of trauma in these inserted threads.
So that presumably is one of the big benefits of having this kind of flexible thread.
Yeah, so we think this is primarily due to the size as well as the flexibility of the thread. We have a pathway to actually go from currently 1,000 to hopefully 3,000, if not 6,000 by end of this year.
Wow.
And then end of next year, we want to get to even more, 16,000.
Wow.
There's a couple limitations to that. One is, obviously being able to photolithographically print those wires. As I mentioned, it's 2 micron in width and spacing. Obviously, there are chips that are much more advanced than those types of resolution, and we have some of the tools that we have brought in-house to be able to do that. So traces will be narrower, just so that you have to have more of the wires coming up into the chip. Chips also cannot linearly consume more energy as you have more and more channels. So there's a lot of innovations in the circuit, and architecture as well as the circuit design topology to make them lower power. You need to also think about if you have all of these spikes, how do you send that off to the end application? So you need to think about bandwidth limitation there and potentially innovations in signal processing. Physically, one of the biggest challenges is going to be the interface. It's always the interface that breaks. Bonding this thin film array to the electronics, it starts to become very, very highly dense interconnects. So how do you connectorize that? There's a lot of innovations in kind of the 3D integrations in the recent ears that we can take advantage of. One of the biggest challenges that we do have is, forming this hermetic barrier, right? This is an extremely harsh environment that we're in, the brain. So how do you protect it from, like the brain trying to kill your electronics to also your electronics leaking things that you don't want into the brain, and that forming that hermetic barrier is going to be a very, very big challenge that we, I think are actually well suited to tackle.
How do you test that? Like, what's the development?
The thing that actually, so a couple things. One is, obviously if you're blind from birth, the way brain works, especially in the early age, neuroplasticity is really nothing other than, kind of your brain and different parts of your brain fighting for the limited territory.
Yeah.
And I mean, very, very quickly you see cases where, people that are, I mean, you also hear about people who are blind that have heightened sense of hearing or some other senses. And the reason for that is because that cortex that's not used just gets taken over by these different parts of the cortex. So for those types of individuals, I mean, I guess they're going to have to now map some other parts of their senses into what they call vision, but it's going to be obviously a very, very different conscious experience. So I think that's an interesting caveat. The other thing that also is important to highlight is that we're currently limited by our biology in terms of the wavelength that we can see. There's a very, very small wavelength that is a visible light wavelength that we can see with our eyes. But when you have an external camera with this BCI system, you're not limited to that. You can have infrared, you can have UV, you can have whatever other spectrum that you want to see. And whether that gets mapped to some sort of weird conscious experience, I have no idea. But when oftentimes I talk to people about the goal of Neuralink being going beyond the limits of our biology. That's sort of what I mean.
And if you're able to control the kind of raw signal, is that when we use our sight, we're getting the photons and there's not much processing on it. If you're be able to control that signal, maybe you can do some kind of processing. Maybe you do object detection ahead of time.
Yeah.
You're doing some kind of pre-processing, and there's a lot of possibilities to explore that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just increasing sort of thermal imaging, that kind of stuff, but it's also just doing some kind of interesting processing.
Correct. Yeah.
What have you learned from just getting to observe these folks?
Yeah.
World experts in different disciplines work together.
Yeah, there's a sweet spot where people disagree and forcefully speak their mind and passionately defend their position, and yet are still able to accept information from others and change their ideas when they're wrong. And so I like the analogy of sort of how you polish rocks. You put hard things in a hard container and spin it. People bash against each other, and out comes a more refined product. And so to make a good team at Neuralink, we've tried to find people that are not afraid to defend their ideas passionately, and occasionally strongly disagree with people that they're working with, and have the best idea come out on top.
What's that like? You mentioned doing a surgery where the person is likely not to survive. Does that wear on you?
Yeah. It's especially challenging when you, with all respect to our elders, it doesn't hit so much when you're taking care of an 80-year-old and something was going to get them pretty soon anyway. And so you lose a patient like that, and it was part of the natural course of what is expected of them in the coming years, regardless. Taking care of, a father of 2 or 3, 4 young kids, so someone in their 30s that didn't have it coming, and they show up in your ER having their first seizure of their life, and lo and behold, they've got a huge malignant, inoperable, or incurable brain tumor. You can only do that, I think, a handful of times before it really starts eating away at your armor. Or a young mother that shows up that has a giant hemorrhage in her brain that she's not going to survive from, and they bring her 4-year-old daughter in to say goodbye one last time before they turn the ventilator off. That, the great Henry Marsh is an English neurosurgeon who said it best. I think he says every neurosurgeon carries with them a private graveyard, and I definitely feel that, especially with young parents. That kills me. They had a lot more to give. The loss of those people specifically has a knock-on effect that's going to make the world worse for people for a long time, and it's just hard to feel powerless in the face of that. And that's where I think you have to be borderline evil to fight against a company like Neuralink, or to constantly be taking pot shots at us, because what we're doing is to try to fix that stuff. We're trying to give people options to reduce suffering. We're trying to take the pain out of life that broken brains brings in. And this is just our little way that we're fighting back against entropy, I guess.
Yeah, that's the amount of suffering that's endured when some of the things that we take for granted that our brain is able to do is taken away is immense. And to be able to restore some of that functionality is a real gift.
Yeah, we're just starting the value proposition for the average person. A keyboard is a pretty clunky human interface, requires a lot of training. It's highly variable in the maximum performance that the average person can achieve. I think taking that out of the equation and just having a natural, word to computer interface might change things for a lot of people.
It'd be hilarious if that is the reason people do it. Even if you have speech to text that's extremely accurate, it currently isn't.
Right.
But it's say gotten super accurate. It'd be hilarious if people went for Neuralink just so you avoid the embarrassing aspect of speaking, like looking like a douchebag speaking to your phone in public, which is a real, that's a real constraint.
Yeah. I mean, with a bone conducting case, that can be an invisible headphone, say, and the ability to think words into software and have it respond to you, that starts to sound sort of like embedded superintelligence. If you can silently ask for the Wikipedia article on any subject and have it read to you without any observable change happening in the outside world. For one thing, standardized testing is obsolete.
Yeah. If it's done well on the UX side, it could change. I don't know if it transforms society, but it really can create a kind of shift in the way we interact with digital devices in the way that a smartphone did. Yeah, I would, just having to look into the safety of everything involved, I would totally try it. So it doesn't have to go to some incredible thing where it connects your vision or to some other, it connects all over your brain. That could be just connecting to the hand knob.